Hello everyone, welcome to another very exciting tutorial. Today we're going to follow up on our series on carousel sliders, and I'm going to show you today how you can create this effect. As you can see here, this time I use like a mobile view to showcase how you can basically use the mouse move to kind of move the slider on your carousels or your image gallery or whatever you want to use within these cards, right? This is going to be a tutorial with the concept of using mouse move, but in the next tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can use pretty much the same concept to actually make it work on mobile devices. By the way, you know that on a mobile device, mouse move is not what you use. You will have to use the touch events. But today I'm going to show you the concept of how to have this kind of drag event that you can have so that we can use it and build on top of it how you can use touch events. So without further ado, let's get started. I go as always to cotus.com, front end and Codenest Online front end editor. So first things first, I'm going to start creating a simple markup, right? So I will start with a div with class mobile phone. And then within the mobile phone, I will have my card container. So basically a class with card container. And then within that, I will have my cards. So let's add maybe 4 cards for now. And then within the CSS, I'm going to style this. So for the starter, I'm going to go ahead and define the styles for my mobile phone, assuming that this is a mobile phone like an iPhone. Let's put a width of 411 pixels, and then let's put a height of 731 pixel. Give it a background of CCC. So you see something like this. Obviously, when you're developing for mobile phone, you don't need to do that. But for the visualization purposes, I'm gonna add this mobile phone styles over here. I'm gonna give it a margin of 100 pixel top and bottom and auto right and left. And then I'll give it a border radius of 3 pixel and then position relative and make sure that I give it a border of 2 pixels solid and like AAA, so we have some sort of a border, and that's about it. For the card container, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the card container position absolute. So this is the container that will contain all of our cards. So I'm going to give a top of 120 pixels, left of 20 pixel, and let's have it for now. So basically I put it right over here, so it starts from somewhere from top 120 of its container, which is mobile phone, and left of 20 pixel. If I go ahead and style a card, you'll see how it will look like. So I'm going to give it a width for each card of 300 pixel. Let's give them a height of 370 pixel, and then let's give it a background of FFF. So now you can see something like that. Now all the cards are sort of vertically uh, one after the other. In order to fix it, I can go ahead here in my card container. Let me give the card container, let's fix this card container. So now you can see the margins correctly. Now I can just set the display to be flex, right? So that will make the cards be aligned horizontally. And now for each card, I'm going to give a margin right of 20 pixel. So now there is a bit of a distance or space between the cards. Now let's give the border radius for each card something like 5 pixel. And let's make, yeah, so far so good. So this is going to be our cards. Let's just put some numbers in it. 1, 2, 3, and 4 so that we have some sort of an indication of which card we have in our views. So here I'm going to use on the card to just align the numbers. I'm going to use display flex for aligning them horizontally. I'm just going to use justify content to be center, and to align them vertically, I'm going to choose align items, and then I'll make that center as well. Now you can see that they are center. You can see that it's outside the view of our mobile, so the only thing I need to do is set the overflow to be hidden. So now we have The representation of the containers of our cards, this can be anything, right? A testimonial, background image, or some sort of a text, right? So now I pretty much have my layout set up already. Now let's jump into the interaction and the actual JavaScript that makes it work the way I showed in the demo. The first thing I need to do is to have a reference to my, in HTML, to have this card container, because that's what I'm going to use to basically move right or left to have that effect that you saw in the demo. So here I'm going to say const uh, card container, and I'm going to use document.query selector and then card container, right? Now, the gist of the code is I need to add an event listener for mouse down, right? So mouse down, and then here, what I want to do is that I want to define a variable or which acts as some sort of a flag. So let me add it. So I'm just going to set let moving false. So there's nothing, we don't do any moving. And then when I click on the mouse down, when I click on the mouse, I'm going to make sure that I set it to true, right? And then I will have an event listener for mouse up. So mouse up. And then the second parameter, obviously a function. And then here, what I can do is basically move back the variable moving to be false. So basically, this is an indication that I'm right now, when I drag, it basically says that I'm now moving, right? And when I leave the mouse or lift up my finger from the mouse or touchpad, I set the moving to false. Now the actual core, the actual logic is like we need to add an event listener, which is called mouse move, right? And this is where the logic actually happens. You can see that I passed the event object as the E here. So now, if moving, which means that I actually clicked on the mouse, like I pressed the mouse button or the touchpad, but I didn't release it, right? Meaning that I'm dragging. So if this is the case, what I would like to do is that I want to calculate the amount of move that I have on my mouse on the x-axis, right? So I can get it from the event object. So I'm going to say e.pageX is going to be where my mouse position is with regards to the x-axis. And then I also want to know how much I moved the mouse from its previous position. And in order to do that, I need to define a variable called maybe mouse last position, and I will set it to 0. So here I can just define a constant. I will say diff in x-axis will be e.pageX minus mouse last position. And then at the end, what I need to do is make sure that I set the mouse last position to be basically whenever I clicked on the mouse, right? So this is going to be something that I need to set here. So I will say mouse last position is equals to, now I need the event object here. I'll set it to e dot page x, right? So pageX property on the event object basically tells me the sort of position of the mouse on the x-axis with regards to the parent or with regards to the page, right? So now that I know that I have my e.pageX whenever I click, and now if I start dragging, this value will reflect the amount of difference that I moved the mouse, right? So the only thing I need to do now is make sure that I say card container dot style dot transform, and then I set that value. So I'm going to use the ES6 object literal syntax, so translate on x-axis, and then I will just choose the amount, which is diff x, and then I just pass pixel, just like that, right? So now if you notice when I start, we will get the difference from when I actually clicked on the page, which is mouse last position, and the current ePage X that changes on our mouse move event listener. So if I start moving this, let's see if I wrote everything correctly. So translate X, obviously here. I need to fix this. So now if I start moving, you can see that it actually moves until I release the mouse. Now I release the mouse. So now if I start doing that again, you'll see the problem. So it starts from very beginning, right? Because the problem is that translate x is not relative, it's absolute. So from when I say translate x different, it will reset the position or the translate of the cart container to 0 again, right? Whenever I do this. So in order to fix that, I need to make sure I fetch the current translate value that I have in at the moment of releasing the mouse, and then use that plus the diff x so that I always preserve the amount of transform that I did in the previous iteration of my mouse move. And in order to get that, it's actually pretty simple. What I can do is that I'm going to define a variable called transform, right? And I set it to 0. Now, whenever I click on the mouse, I'm going to populate this value. So transform is going to be window, and then I say get computed style, and I'm going to tell in a bit what that stands for. And I pass the element that I want to get the computed style. So when I start moving the mouse and I add this translate x, I can get the amount of style or the translate that I applied using window.get computed style and then pass the element that I'm interested, right? So now I can use, for example, on this, there will be a object that gets returned from this, and I can use get property value and then transform, right? Because transform is what I used in order to basically create it. Let's just console log this so that we see what that stands for, and then I'll take it from there. So if I open the console from here, if I start clicking, you'll see that I get a value none. But if I start dragging, now if I click again, you'll see that we get this value, which is a matrix with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 elements. And what we are interested is actually this value that we have over here. So basically, in order to get this value, I'm going to use a very naive sort of string, because this is a string. So I'm going to use a very naive string sort of split function to get that value. In order to get that, I can do this. I get this value, and then using ternary operation, if it wasn't none, like that, I'm going to assign the same value that I have here, right? Just like that. So I need to put this over here. So just like that. Otherwise, I'm just going to set it to 0, right? So what ternary operation says is that if this is true, which in the first iteration it is because we get none, then, well, it's not true, so it's not none. What I want to do is get the computed style, the property transform, but now that we know how it looks like, I can do split using comma, which returns an array, and then I get the fourth element, which represents by this number, right? And then as you can see, there is a bit of like, space over here. So I can use trim operation on trim function on string to kind of trim that down, right? Otherwise, I want to set it to 0. Now let's see how this transform would look like. So initially, when I click, it goes through this ternary operation and it checks if it's not none. It is none, so it's not going to go on this case, but it's going to go after the colon and sets it to none. But see if I start dragging it and releasing, and now if I clicking it now, you'll see that we actually get a proper value of the amount of transform we did on the x-axis, right? On the cart container, which is this value. So now I have this value. What I can do is basically try to sort of, because this is a string, I can here when I do mouse move, instead of doing this, I can create a new variable called transform value, and then I can use parse int because I know always this is integer. I can use parse int and then I just pass my transform, which I populated in whenever I click on mouse down. And then I just add the amount of actual diff x that we created using the different amount of mouse move that we had. Now, if I replace this with transform value here, just like that, you'll see that when I move here, I release the mouse, and if I continue, you'll see that it doesn't anymore reset to the zero transform or the translate that the cart container has. So it actually preserves it, as you can see. So now we have some sort of a good sort of effect, and this is exactly what we wanted. Now the problem, if let me close this. Now the problem is that if I continue moving, you'll see that it actually goes outside of the boundary, which we want to actually validate to make sure that after the mouse, after the element gets here, we don't want actually the mouse move to have any effect. And in order to do that, it's also pretty simple. We need to keep track of the amount of mouse move that we had. So here I'm going to define another variable, call it last page x. I'll set it to 0. And then whenever we mouse move at the end of the method, I'm just going to make sure that I set the last page x to that value, which is e.pagex, right? So always when I'm moving, I always keep the last page x value that we had when we moved the mouse, which is great. Now what I can do, I can here apply a text test. So I can say if e.pagex, which is the current position of the x, minus last page x was more than 0, meaning that I'm actually moving from left to right. So left is here and right is over here. So when I'm moving towards this way, I want to, if the case is that I'm doing that, if it's this, if it's like that, if I'm moving on the sort of the right direction on the page when I'm dragging, and then I will check if this transform value is more than 0, I want to return. I don't want the mouse move to have any effect. So let's see what happens. Just making sure that okay, I made a mistake. I don't want to put it here. I want to put it here. So if transform value that we get is more than 0, I want to return. Basically, I don't want to set the transform on the cart container. So now if I go like this, now if I move back, you will see that I'm actually dragging right now, but it doesn't go beyond the initial position. And the reason is that first and foremost, I'm checking that I'm actually moving on that direction, right? So basically I'm moving, returning on the very first elements. Now the next thing is that it checks if the transform value is more than 0, it will return. And that is exactly what happens, because initially when I'm doing this, the transform value will be negative because we are moving the actual cart container on the negative value, right? But as soon as I'm moving it over here, at some point it will become positive. And then in that case, I want to return. The same thing I need to do when I reach the end of here. As you can see right now, I can just drag all the way and this will just go away. In order to do that, I'm just going to add an else, meaning that I'm moving on the other direction, which is this direction that I'm doing over here. So here I can check else. Now, if The transform value is more than card container dot offset width, meaning that I'm moving, way over the card container width that contains all these cards, but minus 320. And this 320 is coming from the fact that I added some sort of a padding to all these cards, right? And also considering the fact that the initial width is like this, that's where I came up with the value, right? Right over here. Now, if this is the case, I also want to return. But the most important thing is that when I drag it this way, the transform value is usually negative. So I need to make it positive. I can use math ABS or absolute. And now what it does is that it checks if the amount of translate that I have on my card container, uh, the amount, I don't care about the sign. I just want to know that the amount that I translated my card container. That's why I disregard the negative value by calling math ABS. So this value will always be positive. If it's more than card container dot offset width minus 320, I also want to make sure that I don't apply the style translate anymore, right? So let me show if I did everything correctly here. So we have an if, we have an else, cart container, offset width. So everything seems to be correct. And then I actually return. Okay, let's see what happens. So now if I start dragging, uh, it doesn't do it. Let's see if I get any console error here. There's something wrong I have done. Yes, it says transform value is not defined because I made a mistake here. So transform value. So now you can see that, okay, again, it's not transform value. Why it's not defined? It's because I need to actually define it on the high level first, transform value and set it to 0. So basically I assigned it to the difference that we add here, but I needed to make sure that I set the value over here for the initial. So now you can see that I can start dragging. And now when it reaches here, you can see that it no longer, I'm dragging right now, but it doesn't go anymore on the right side. And then now I can just, you know, move back, and now it's kind of blocked over here regardless of how much I drag, and the same way going forward. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I'm just going to talk a little bit more about what I did over here. So you have to have 3 event listeners when you're using mouse down, mouse move, and mouse up. Then I defined a variable called moving. So this variable will basically set when I click the mouse, but I don't release it. And that's where I start dragging, right? That's where the mouse move event actually happens. So if moving is true, which means that I'm dragging it and I'm not yet releasing the mouse, I get the difference from when I started to click the mouse down and the drag. So that's the amount of value that every time changes. But also I need to have the amount of transform that I did in the previous iteration. And that's where I use this sort of piece of code here to add that as the transform. And then it's as easy as adding those values together so that it not only considers the difference in x, but also the amount of transformation that happened before that. And then I use that value. The next thing was a conditional here to make sure that I don't basically go beyond the boundary of my card container where I'm dragging, right? So, okay, perfect. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please like and share the tutorial if you enjoyed it. And just let me, if you have any concern in the comment section, any questions again in the comment section. Next tutorial is going to be even more fun because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use touch events. The logic is pretty much the same, but then you can expect that to actually work on a mobile device, right? So, yes, I wish you a great day and night and see you next time. Goodbye.